All right, welcome. This is C#, Chapter 6, Modularizing Your Code with Methods. In this chapter, we're going to have a look at what is a method, a void method, how to pass arguments to methods, and how to pass arguments by reference, which is a different way of doing it. We'll look at how to look at value return methods and a little bit more on the debugging method as well. So what is a method? Well, a method, you can really think of it as taking a large block or statements or complex program that you're trying to write and break it down into manageable pieces. The book refers to this as a divide and conquer, because you're going to divide up your code and hopefully conquer it by making it a little bit maybe more simpler or also more accessible. They also refer to this as modularizing your code. So when we do this, and this is always a good practice, is whenever you see a code that can be easily segregated, you can put it into a method and make that code a little bit more modularized. Now there's two basic methods. One's called a void method, and basically a void method is the simple method, which basically when you call the method, it executes a group of statements and then it's done. It just returns back to where it was called from, and it doesn't actually pass anything back and forth. It just executes the statements, and whatever those statements happen to do, that's all it will do. Now, the second type is a value return. And this method right here is going to return something. So you're going to pass information into a method. It's going to then maybe calculate something, and then it's going to return some answer back to the calling statement. So a value return has a little bit more to it. Now, what this looks like, for example, in our code, and we've seen this kind of stuff before, we've had, we've got our solution namespace, and within that we have a class, which is our form. Within that we've got a lot of event handlers when we click on objects, and we've got blocks of statement. And this is how we've been coding to this point. But what we want to do is divide this up and maybe conquer it. So we're going to take this block of statement and put it into a separate method. Put in this block of statements and put it in another separate method to help sort of organize how the code will execute. And also, if for some reason we need to execute this block of statements multiple times, methods become very useful. Now this would look kind of like this, where my button event handler, when I click it, I would just simply execute a method. This is a user-defined method. This is a method I've done, and it's created right here. So here's the header, and this is the body, and the header is, we're taking a private method, and it's not going to return anything. It's going to be void. I'm going to call it method number 2, and I have no argument here. All it's going to do is when it runs this, it's going to jump down to here, execute the statement, and when it executes the last part of that method, it's going to return back and run the next method, and so on. As soon as it hits method 3, it's going to come down here, and it's going to execute this statement, and then it's going to go back up to the calling statement. So this is referred to as the calling method. That's the event handler. We click, and these are the private methods that we created in that code. And at first glance, you might think, well, why go through that process? Why not just put the two statements in here and here? And that's a fair question. But later, when we start looking at more complex code, there's logical groups of statements that fit really nicely together, and we may use them multiple times. In fact, I could call on this method now multiple times, and I would save myself having to type all those statements. There might be 10, 20 statements in that line of code. Now, the method themselves, and the one we just looked at, is called a void method, which means void meaning nothing, and they're not returning anything back to the calling block that you had initiated that method from. So it doesn't return anything. On the other hand, we've got a value return, which we'll look at in the next. But now, the method definition is broken into two parts: the header, which is the top of the method, and the body and the statements. Now, if you look at the method header here, here's the header. Right here it says private, and they call that the access modifier, how you're going to access it. It's privately accessed. And then we've got void, which is the return, which we're not going to have any return if it's void. And then we have the method name, which is right here. And then we have the block of statements. So this is how you set up a method inside of C#. So that access modifier, the return type, the method name, and the braces or the parentheses with the argument in it, followed by the block of statements that you want to execute. All right, so that's sort of an introduction on methods, and I will see you in the next video.